I was only helping my alien friend through mating season. Now she won't let me go. Ethan had always been fascinated by the stars. Ever since he was a child, he had imagined what it would be like to meet beings from other worlds. But nothing in his imagination had prepared him for Zira. Zira was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver, and her eyes were deep pools of violet that seemed to see right into his thoughts. She moved with a grace that seemed to defy gravity, and though her body was unlike any human's, there was a warmth in her presence that made Ethan feel safe, even mesmerized. He first met her on a mission to explore a recently discovered exoplanet in the Epsilon Eridani system. Humanity had been sending probes and colonists to nearby star systems for decades, but this planet was different. It had a breathable atmosphere, abundant water, and an energy signature that suggested life. When Ethan's ship landed, he thought he was alone, but then he saw her crouched near a pool of sparkling liquid, examining strange, bioluminescent plants. At first, she had been wary, watching him carefully as he stepped closer. But then she had smiled, or at least Ethan thought it was a smile. It was a small, subtle curve of her luminous lips, and in that moment something in him relaxed. He realized she was curious, not dangerous. Over the next few days, Ethan and Zira learned to communicate. At first, it was through gestures and expressions, but soon they discovered a shared rhythm of sounds that allowed them to exchange ideas. Ethan marveled at her intelligence. She understood complex engineering concepts, physics problems, and even aspects of human culture that he explained to her. In turn, she taught him about her world, the rhythms of her species, and how they lived in harmony with their environment. One evening, as the twin moons rose above the horizon, Zira revealed something unusual. She was entering a season that her species called the cycle of bonding. Ethan listened as she explained that during this period, her instincts compelled her to seek connection and support from others. It was natural, she said, and essential for her well-being. Ethan felt a flicker of apprehension, but he also understood. He had come to respect her deeply and wanted to help. "I'll help you," he said simply, and Zira's eyes shone with gratitude. Over the next several days, he accompanied her through the rituals of the cycle. It was nothing like human courtship. There were no romantic expectations, only mutual trust, care, and emotional connection. Ethan helped her gather rare minerals, assisted in the construction of delicate energy conduits, and shared moments of quiet reflection by the glowing pools of her planet. Each day, their bond grew stronger. Zira began to rely on him more and more, not out of necessity, but because she found comfort in his presence. Ethan, too, realized that he had never felt so alive. The stars above were brighter, the air fresher, and even the simple act of walking alongside her brought him joy. But then one morning, Ethan noticed something he hadn't expected. Zira didn't want him to leave. Every time he mentioned returning to the ship, she would tilt her head, make soft, questioning sounds, and place her hand on his arm. It was gentle, not demanding, but he sensed her anxiety. "I can leave if you need space," he said carefully. "You don't have to." Zira shook her head, cutting him off. Her eyes were wide and pleading. Ethan realized that her attachment had deepened beyond what he had anticipated. Helping her through her cycle had created a bond stronger than either of them had imagined. He tried to reason with himself. He knew he couldn't stay forever. He had duties, responsibilities, and a life back on Earth. But looking at Zira, so vulnerable and earnest, he felt torn. He wanted to honor her trust and care for her, but he also couldn't deny the pull of his own life. Over the next few days, Ethan tried different approaches. He explained schedules, reassured her that he would return after brief trips to the ship, and even introduced other members of the expedition to provide companionship. But nothing seemed to work. Zira followed him, mimicked his routines, and made her presence known in every corner of the habitat. Her trust and dependency were evident, and Ethan realized he had underestimated the depth of the bond that the cycle of bonding created. It wasn't frightening or threatening, but it was intense. Zira had woven herself into his daily life so seamlessly that Ethan found it hard to imagine the habitat without her. He noticed little habits she had picked up from him, the way she moved her hands when she talked, the pauses she took when solving problems, the gentle hum she made when she was focused. She had become, in a sense, a mirror of his own patterns, and he couldn't help but smile at it. One afternoon, while helping her collect luminescent flowers from the cliffside, Ethan finally voiced what had been on his mind. "Zira, I want to help you. I really do. But I also need to return to the ship for a while. I can't stay out here forever." Zira looked at him, her eyes glistening with an emotion that he couldn't name. She stepped closer and placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. For a moment, Ethan felt the weight of her trust and dependence, and he understood. She wasn't trying to trap him. She was expressing the depth of her connection, the intensity of the bond that her species had evolved over millennia. "I know," he said softly, "and I want to be here for you, but we have to find balance. We can't lose ourselves in each other, even if the bond feels overwhelming." Zira tilted her head, and for the first time, Ethan noticed a hint of frustration mixed with curiosity. She had never encountered the concept of boundaries in the same way humans did. Everything in her culture was about trust, shared responsibility, and mutual support, but the idea of personal limits was foreign. Ethan realized he would have to teach her gently, with patience and understanding. He couldn't simply leave, and he couldn't allow the bond to become unhealthy. Over the next few hours, he demonstrated small acts of independence, taking breaks, walking alone, and returning after a period of absence. Zira watched carefully, trying to mimic the balance he showed, but it was clear that she struggled to understand. That night, as they sat by the glowing pools, Ethan felt a profound sense of wonder. Humanity had ventured across the stars, met alien life, and discovered worlds beyond imagination, but the true lesson he was learning came from Zira. Compassion, empathy, patience, and the power of connection were not limited to humans. They were universal. As he drifted to sleep under the alien sky, he knew that the days ahead would be challenging. Zira's dependence would test him, and he would have to find ways to honor her trust while maintaining his own freedom. But for the first time in his life, he felt truly connected to another being, in a way that transcended species, culture, and language. And though he didn't yet know how they would navigate the next phase of the cycle, he felt a spark of hope. Humanity had taught him ingenuity and courage, and now he would teach Zira about balance, boundaries, and friendship, the kind that could survive even the most intense seasons. As the twin moons reflected off the pools, Zira nestled close, her hand brushing against his. Ethan smiled. Tomorrow, he thought, they would continue learning from each other. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would discover that helping an alien friend through mating season could teach him more about humanity than anything he had ever known. Part 1 ends here, leaving the audience with a gentle cliffhanger. Zira's attachment has grown strong, Ethan must balance caring for her with his own needs, and the next stage of the cycle will test both of them emotionally and mentally. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the crystal-like canopy of the alien forest, casting gentle beams across the bioluminescent flora. Ethan woke to find Zira already awake, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the soft light. She sat cross-legged, examining a cluster of floating spores that shimmered like tiny stars. When she saw him stir, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart ache in the most human way. "Good morning," he said softly, stretching. Zira tilted her head and made a melodic sound, a greeting she had learned from him. Ethan had been teaching her language carefully, showing that communication was more than gestures. It was about meaning and understanding. She was picking up faster than he expected, though her species, physiology made some sounds impossible for human vocal cords. Still, the effort itself was touching. Today, Ethan decided they would continue the lessons in balance. He knew the cycle of bonding was still ongoing, and he needed to find a way to honor Zira's instinctive needs while keeping his own independence intact. "Let's take a walk along the cliffs," he suggested. "There are flowers that bloom only in the morning light." Zira's face glowed with excitement. She had always been curious about the way he noticed small details, tiny petals, delicate shapes, subtle shifts in light. It was part of what made him fascinating to her, he realized. And he, in turn, was learning to notice things that he had once overlooked, seeing the world through her eyes. As they climbed the cliffside, Ethan kept his pace steady, allowing Zira to stay close but also giving her moments to explore alone. She would dart ahead to examine a flower, then return with a soft trill that sounded almost like laughter. Her gestures were exuberant, full of life, and Ethan found himself laughing along. "You are remarkable," he said quietly as they paused at a ledge, looking out over a valley filled with mist and glowing vegetation. "I've never seen anything like this." Zira reached out, placing her hand lightly on his shoulder. The contact was comforting, a silent acknowledgement of their bond. Ethan realized that even though she depended on him, she was also learning from him, absorbing his calm, careful approach to challenges. In some ways, it was like teaching a child, but the intelligence, curiosity, and emotions she displayed were far beyond anything human children could achieve. By midday, they returned to the habitat, carrying samples of flowers, minerals, and spores. Zira was enthusiastic, arranging them with care. Ethan watched her work, noticing that she had begun to mimic his organizational habits, the small rituals he performed without thinking. Her dependence was no longer just instinctive, it was adaptive. She was learning, growing, and forming a partnership with him. But the real test came that afternoon. Ethan needed to leave for the ship to check some data logs and resupply. He knew Zira would struggle. He had seen her anxiety flare at even short separations. He tried to prepare her gently. "I'll be back soon," he said, kneeling to meet her eyes. "I just need to go to the ship. You will be safe here. Can you manage for a little while?" Zira tilted her head and made a series of soft, questioning sounds. She stepped closer, almost pleading. Ethan understood. The cycle of bonding had created a dependency so strong that even a brief absence felt like a risk to her well-being. "Listen," he said carefully, "I know this is hard, but trust is part of our bond, too. You can be strong and I will come back." Her eyes flickered, and for a moment he thought she might refuse. Then she nodded slowly. It was a small victory, but significant. She was beginning to understand that love and care did not mean possession. Ethan departed, leaving Zira with a set of tasks designed to occupy her mind. Arranging samples, studying the pools, and mapping new areas of the forest. He glanced back once and saw her standing at the edge of the habitat, watching him go, a mixture of longing and determination in her eyes. At the ship, Ethan worked quickly, checking equipment, logging data, and preparing supplies. But even as he completed his tasks, his thoughts were on Zira. He realized how much he had come to care for her, not in a romantic sense, but in a deeply human way. She had challenged him, inspired him, and taught him lessons about patience, empathy, and cooperation. Returning to the habitat, he found Zira waiting exactly where he had left her. She approached him cautiously, then suddenly threw her arms around his waist. It was a gesture of pure trust, and Ethan felt a warmth spread through him. He hugged her back gently, careful not to overwhelm her. "You did well," he said. "You managed without me?" Zira made a sound that seemed almost like a laugh. She had learned, at least in part, the meaning of independence within connection. The bond between them had shifted. It was no longer just about her dependence, but about mutual understanding and care. Over the next few days, they continued to navigate the cycle of bonding. Ethan introduced small routines that allowed both of them freedom, while maintaining the emotional connection. They explored the planet together, shared meals of native fruits and minerals, and experimented with creative ways to communicate through light patterns, gestures, and musical tones. One morning, Zira guided Ethan to a hidden grove he had not discovered before. The trees here were taller, their trunks glowing faintly, and the ground sparkled as if embedded with countless tiny stars. She gestured for him to look closer, and he saw that the plants formed intricate patterns, almost like a map. "This is your gift," she said, placing her hand on his chest. "You see things I never noticed. You bring order, curiosity, and understanding." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Humanity had ventured across the stars and discovered new worlds, but this moment, sharing insight, learning, and wonder with a completely alien being, was the true reward. He realized that the cycle of bonding was not about control or possession. It was about learning together, growing together, and respecting each other's individuality. As the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Ethan and Zira sat by the glowing pools. They watched the reflections dance and shimmer, mirroring their own shared experiences. Zira leaned close, resting her head on his shoulder. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, feeling the steady warmth of her presence. "I think we've learned something important," he said softly. "Bonding doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding ways to grow together while staying true to who you are." Zira tilted her head, making a soft sound that conveyed agreement. For the first time, Ethan felt a sense of balance. They had faced the intensity of her species' instincts and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. Their connection was no longer a test, it was a partnership. Days turned into weeks. The cycle of bonding gradually faded, leaving behind a profound friendship built on trust, respect, and shared discovery. Zira began exploring more independently, often returning with new insights to share. Ethan continued his research, inspired by the creativity and intelligence she displayed. Together, they mapped uncharted regions of the planet, experimented with alien technologies, and documented the flora and fauna with meticulous care. One evening, as they watched the twin moons rise, Ethan reflected on the journey. Humanity had achieved incredible feats: space travel, planetary exploration, and interstellar communication. But the greatest achievement, he realized, was understanding and connecting with life unlike their own. Zira had shown him the power of empathy, patience, and trust. In helping her navigate her instincts, he had discovered his own capacity for compassion and adaptability. "Do you think humans will ever understand beings like you?" he asked quietly. Zira looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. Then she made a series of gentle sounds and gestures, conveying something he understood instinctively. Understanding was possible, but it required openness, patience, and respect. Ethan smiled. That was enough. They did not need to be fully understood to share trust and friendship. They only needed to honor each other's strengths, learn from one another, and grow together. In the end, humanity's journey into the stars was not just about technology or exploration. It was about connection, empathy, and the ability to rise above instinct and fear. Through Zira, Ethan had discovered the essence of what it meant to be human: to care deeply, to teach and learn, and to embrace differences with patience and curiosity. As he watched Zira float above the glowing pools, her silver skin reflecting the twin moons, Ethan felt a surge of hope. Humanity had the potential to achieve great things, but the greatest triumph would always be in the bonds they formed, with each other and with the universe itself. He reached out and she responded, their hands meeting in a gesture that was no longer just about instinct, but about mutual respect, trust, and friendship. Together, they had navigated the intensity of her species' bonding cycle, and together they would continue to explore, learn, and grow. And for the first time, Ethan realized that helping an alien friend through mating season had done more than create a bond. It had revealed the best of what it meant to be human. Ethan awoke to a quiet hum that filled the habitat, a sound unlike any wind or wildlife he had heard. Before, Zira was already awake, hovering just above the glowing pools, her silver skin catching the early light. She turned toward him, her violet eyes bright with excitement. "There is something," she said in her melodic tone, the words almost human but still distinctly alien. Ethan nodded, encouraging her to continue. He had learned over the weeks that Zira's curiosity often led them to discoveries beyond anything he could anticipate. She guided him to the outer cliffs, a region they had not yet explored. The air was warmer here, and the plants swayed in intricate patterns that seemed almost like a dance. Ethan watched in awe as Zira moved among them, her gestures precise and confident. She had grown more independent since the cycle of bonding, yet she still sought his guidance, a balance they had perfected together. As they reached a hidden cavern, Zira stopped and gestured for Ethan to peer inside. The walls glowed faintly with phosphorescent patterns, and in the center of the cavern was a pool filled with liquid light, almost like captured starlight. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This was unlike anything he had ever seen in his life or in any exploration report. Zira extended her hand toward the pool. "This place is sacred," she said. "It appears once every cycle. It shows what is important to those who enter." Ethan hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. The pool reflected his image, but not as he appeared in the mirror. He saw himself as he felt inside, curious, compassionate, patient, and capable of great connection. Beside him, Zira's reflection shimmered, highlighting her trust, intelligence, and adaptability. Together, their images intertwined, showing a bond that was deep, resilient, and balanced. "This is remarkable," Ethan whispered. "It's like the planet itself understands us." Zira nodded, her hand brushing against his. There was no need for words. They both understood that this discovery was more than just a physical marvel. It was a reflection of their growth, their cooperation, and the lessons they had learned from each other. For hours, they explored the cavern, discovering small pools and crystals that reacted to their presence. Zira demonstrated how the light responded to emotions, shifting in color and intensity according to their feelings. Ethan experimented, laughing softly when a flicker of violet light danced across the walls at a sudden thought of joy. He realized that these crystals were a mirror not just of the body, but of the mind and spirit. As the day passed, Ethan and Zira took turns leading the exploration, their movements fluid and coordinated. Zira had learned to respect boundaries while expressing her curiosity, and Ethan had learned to respond with patience and observation rather than imposing direction. Together, they had created a rhythm, a dance of mutual understanding and respect that mirrored the larger universe around them. At one point, Zira paused at the edge of a particularly deep pool. "I see something," she said softly. Ethan leaned closer and observed the shimmering liquid. Within it, he saw images of Earth, of other humans exploring the stars, of people learning, teaching, and growing together. Then the reflection shifted, showing a human hand reaching toward an alien hand, just like his and Zira's. Ethan felt a swell of pride and hope. Humanity had ventured into the stars, and yet here in this quiet cavern, he saw the true potential of their species, not in technology or conquest, but in connection, empathy, and the ability to understand beings completely unlike themselves. Zira turned toward him, her expression thoughtful. "You have brought something important here," she said. "Your presence changes how the planet responds. It is harmonious." Ethan smiled. "I think it's more than just me, it's what we have together. We learn from each other." As night fell, they emerged from the cavern to find the sky ablaze with alien constellations. The twin moons reflected across the valleys, and the forest glowed with its own soft luminescence. Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time, he was not just an observer of the universe, but an active participant in it. He had a friend, a teacher, and a companion in Zira. Over the following weeks, their bond deepened even further. Zira began creating her own projects, designing structures that amplified the glowing pools, light, and exploring new regions of the planet. Ethan assisted when needed but mostly observed, providing guidance only when she requested it. The cycle of bonding had long ended, but their connection continued to grow, evolving into something mature, balanced, and mutually supportive. One day, while examining a particularly intricate plant formation, Zira stopped and looked at Ethan seriously. "I have learned something about your species," she said. "Humans are capable of great patience and understanding. You teach without demanding. You care without controlling." Ethan nodded, humbled. "And you have taught me the same. Your world, your instincts, and your curiosity, they've opened my mind in ways I never imagined." Zira's eyes sparkled. "Then we are ready." Ethan tilted his head. "Ready for what?" She gestured toward the horizon. "To share this knowledge with others. To teach them what we have learned. To show that connection and understanding are stronger than any obstacle." It was then that Ethan realized the full impact of their journey. The lessons of trust, empathy, and cooperation were not just personal, they were universal. If humans could form such bonds with beings like Zira, then perhaps they could extend that understanding to countless other species across the stars. Over the next several days, they began preparing for this next stage. Ethan taught Zira about human communication methods, while she demonstrated ways to translate her species, concepts into forms that other humans could understand. They worked together on visual guides, simple symbols, and shared rituals that could communicate trust and partnership across species. As they collaborated, they discovered something extraordinary. Certain crystals in the planet's caverns responded to these combined efforts, emitting light patterns that were almost musical in nature. Each pulse of color and sound seemed to convey a message of harmony, a signal that could potentially communicate with other explorers or visitors. "This is incredible," Ethan said. "We've created something that could help humans understand your world and your species without misunderstanding or fear." Zira tilted her head, eyes glowing faintly. "It is a gift for those who are willing to learn." The days became a routine of discovery, teaching, and exploration. Ethan and Zira grew more attuned to each other, able to anticipate thoughts, reactions, and gestures almost instinctively. Yet, despite their closeness, they had learned the importance of personal space and independence. They were no longer bound by instinct alone. They had created a partnership based on respect, curiosity, and shared purpose. One morning, as they sat on the cliffs watching the sunrise, Ethan felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. Their work was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. Humanity had reached the stars, but the true test of their growth would come not in technology or conquest, but in their ability to connect, understand, and cooperate with beings like Zira. Zira looked at him, her eyes wide with excitement. "Do you think others will understand?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled. "Some will, some may take longer, but what we've built together, it's proof that connection is possible, that patience, care, and curiosity can bridge worlds." Zira made a soft trill of agreement and floated closer. She extended her hand, and Ethan took it. There was no need for words. The gesture spoke of trust, respect, and mutual understanding. They had navigated the intensity of the cycle of bonding, learned to balance instinct and independence, and now they were ready to share their discoveries with the universe. As they gazed out over the glowing forests and the twin moons, Ethan realized that the journey had changed him in ways he could never have imagined. Humanity had ventured into space to explore, to discover, and to conquer, but the greatest achievement, he understood now, would always be connection. In that moment, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for Zira, for the lessons of her species, and for the vast, mysterious universe that had brought them together. Together, they had created something extraordinary, a bond that was not limited by species, instincts, or distance, but defined by empathy, understanding, and the willingness to grow together. And as the first light of the new day reflected off the glowing pools, Ethan knew that their journey had only just begun. There were worlds to explore, beings to meet, and lessons to share. But whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Zira would face them side by side, a testament to the best of humanity, the capacity to care, to teach, and to connect across the stars. The days on the alien planet settled into a rhythm that felt both comforting and exhilarating. Ethan had come to cherish the quiet mornings, where the twin moons lingered in the fading night sky, and the forests glowed with their soft, natural luminescence. Zira had grown increasingly independent, exploring distant areas of the habitat with confidence, yet she always returned to him. Their bond had evolved into a deep, unspoken understanding, a partnership built on trust and mutual curiosity. One morning, Ethan noticed something unusual. While examining a cluster of crystalline plants, Zira paused and seemed to listen intently. Her head tilted in a curious manner, and her hands moved rapidly over the glowing flora. Ethan approached, and she pointed to the crystals, which now emitted subtle pulses of light that he hadn't noticed before. "These are communicating," she said softly. "Not just with us, but with each other. The planet, it is alive in ways we did not understand." Ethan's heart quickened. He had encountered life forms before, but this was different. It wasn't merely biological. It was a network of energy, patterns, and responses, as if the planet itself was observing and learning. He knelt beside Zira, placing a hand near the crystal cluster. A warm sensation spread through him, like a gentle hum in his bones, and he realized that the planet's energy responded to conscious thought, to intention, and to emotion. "This changes everything," Ethan whispered. "We're not just explorers here, we're participants. The planet is teaching us how to interact with it, how to cooperate." Zira made a series of melodic sounds that Ethan had come to interpret as agreement and excitement. She gestured for him to follow her, leading him deeper into the forest. The trees grew taller and more densely packed, their luminescent leaves creating a canopy of shifting colors. Here, the energy of the planet seemed stronger, more deliberate. The paths were not random. They guided them toward areas of discovery and understanding. Hours passed as they explored, and Ethan realized that Zira was teaching him to observe more carefully, to listen to the subtle cues of the environment, and to interpret the energy patterns that indicated the presence of life and intelligence. Each time they discovered a new formation, a glowing pool, or a network of crystals, Ethan felt a sense of awe and gratitude. By evening, they reached a valley that opened to a vast, shimmering lake. The water reflected the twin moons perfectly, and the surface rippled with an almost musical rhythm. Zira approached the edge and extended her hands, her movements creating waves that pulsed with light. Ethan mirrored her, carefully matching her gestures, and together they produced a symphony of shimmering energy. "It listens," Zira said, her voice soft but excited. The planet responds when we work together. Our bond, it amplifies our connection. Ethan realized she was right. Their partnership was no longer just about friendship or mutual care. It had become a bridge between two species, a demonstration of how cooperation, patience, and understanding could influence and harmonize with life itself. Humanity's HFY ideals, curiosity, empathy, and ingenuity, were now being tested and amplified by an alien ecosystem. Days turned into weeks as Ethan and Zira continued to explore, document, and interact with the planet. They discovered that certain patterns of movement and sound could trigger responses in the environment. Flowers opening in synchrony, crystals glowing in sequences, and pools of light forming temporary images. Zira explained that these responses were part of the planet's natural rhythm, a way of teaching those who engaged respectfully. One morning, Zira led Ethan to a cliff overlooking a distant valley. "There is something you should see," she said. Ethan followed, curious. Below, the valley floor was covered in a living tapestry of plants, pools, and crystals, all glowing in harmony. As they watched, the entire landscape shifted in patterns that resembled constellations, moving and realigning as if communicating with the skies. "This is incredible," Ethan said, his voice filled with awe. "It's like the planet itself is showing us a story, its history, its connections, everything." Zira nodded, eyes shining. "It shows what is important: balance, cooperation, trust. We have learned the principles, but now we see how they are expressed naturally." Ethan realized that their work had reached a new level. They were not just observers. They were active participants in a system that rewarded understanding, patience, and mutual respect. Humanity's ability to connect emotionally and intellectually with other beings, something often overlooked in scientific exploration, was the key that unlocked the planet's responses. Over the following days, they developed ways to teach the planet's patterns to newcomers. They created visual guides, sequences of gestures, and musical tones that could be replicated to communicate respectfully. Zira demonstrated her methods to Ethan, and he adapted them for human comprehension. The process was slow but rewarding, and it became clear that the planet itself was teaching them both, reinforcing lessons of empathy, collaboration, and awareness. One evening, as they rested near a pool that reflected the shimmering night sky, Ethan reflected on how far they had come. When he had first arrived on this planet, he had seen Zira as a mysterious and somewhat unpredictable being. The cycle of bonding had seemed overwhelming, and her attachment had initially felt like a challenge. Yet, through patience, care, and mutual learning, their relationship had evolved into something extraordinary, a partnership that transcended species, instinct, and expectation. "I never imagined this," Ethan said softly. "I thought exploring the stars would be about technology and knowledge, but it's really about connection, isn't it? Understanding, empathy, and working together." Zira made a soft trill, leaning her head against his shoulder. Ethan felt the warmth of her presence and realized that the lessons they had learned together, trust, patience, and cooperation, were not just tools for survival, but the essence of humanity itself. Over time, they discovered that the planet's energy could even be shared remotely. Through precise sequences of gestures and sounds, they were able to create signals that other explorers could interpret, guiding them safely through regions of the forest and helping them understand the ecosystem. It was as if the planet itself wanted to extend its wisdom, but it required humans who could approach with respect and curiosity. Ethan and Zira took great care in teaching these methods. They emphasized that the key was not to control, but to observe, learn, and cooperate. It was a philosophy that reflected the best of humanity, HFY in its purest form, showing that intelligence and empathy could coexist with exploration and discovery. One morning, as they observed a particularly intricate formation of glowing crystals, Zira made a suggestion. "Perhaps we can create a demonstration, a message that shows the values we have learned so that others may understand without fear." Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. Together, they devised a sequence that combined light, sound, and movement. It was simple yet profound, a visual symphony that demonstrated trust, patience, collaboration, and joy. When completed, the formation glowed with a rhythm that was almost musical, communicating their shared understanding in a way that transcended language. As they watched, Ethan felt a surge of hope. Humanity had reached this planet seeking knowledge, But what they had created with Zira was something deeper, a model for how humans could interact with intelligent life across the galaxy, not with fear or force, but with care, curiosity, and respect. The planet responded to their efforts, sending ripples of light through the forests, illuminating hidden pools and creating temporary bridges of glowing energy between distant regions. It was a sign of acknowledgement, almost like applause, and Ethan knew that Zira shared his excitement. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to be human among the stars. It was not about dominating, conquering, or even merely exploring. It was about connection, forming bonds that transcended species, learning from others, and contributing to a greater harmony. And with Zira by his side, he had discovered that this was not just possible, it was essential. As the twin moons rose, casting their silver light across the valley, Ethan and Zira sat together at the edge of the cliffs. The planet's energy pulsed gently beneath them, a living reminder of the lessons they had learned. Ethan reached out, taking Zira's hand, and felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a beginning, an ongoing journey of discovery, trust, and shared purpose. In that moment, he realized that humanity's greatest potential lay not in what they could build, but in what they could understand, share, and nurture. Zira had shown him that the universe was full of wonder, and that the true explorers were those willing to open their hearts as well as their minds. And as they gazed across the glowing forests and shimmering pools, Ethan knew that together, they would continue to explore, learn, and teach, creating a legacy that reflected the very best of humanity: empathy, ingenuity, and the courage to connect across the stars. The planet had given them a gift, but it was not only for them, it was for everyone willing to listen, to observe, and to grow. And Ethan, holding Zira's hand, felt an unshakable certainty. This was only the beginning of a journey that would stretch across worlds, bridging hearts and minds in ways that would define humanity's future among the stars.